Probably 2 or 3 months ago, most people in the state of Mississippi didn't know what Initiative 42 was. In fact, I tell you that there's still a very large chunk of people in the state of Mississippi, probably a third to maybe even 40%, who when they get asked the question about Initiative 42, will tell you they have no idea what it is. And the scary thing is we're about 42 days, 43 days away from an election where we'll decide whether or not to pass this initiative, and by doing that, whether or not to amend the Mississippi Constitution. The other interesting thing is when you talk to people about this initiative, even people who know that it's going to be on the ballot, there are plenty of people that don't know that it will amend the Constitution. They just think it's some random policy statement, maybe a change of state law, but they don't even understand that what we're doing is altering the very framework of government, the Constitution, in the state of Mississippi. And there are a lot of people right now who are fired up about a lot of different issues. And I admire, activist passion for certain issues. I know there are people in the room probably who have already associated themselves with a presidential candidate. And they're looking forward to being able to support that presidential candidate through 2016. I know there are people who are fired up about supporting certain candidates for office in Mississippi, whether it be the governor or Mike Hurst for AG. And those are legitimate things to be in support of. But I want you to understand and convey to you as clearly as I can that in my opinion, there is no more important issue that you can be engaged on right now than this ballot initiative. Phil Bryant will only be governor for 4 more years. He is guaranteed to win. He's not going to lose this race. But he'll only be governor for 4 more years. A lot of those statewide elected officials, a lot of legislators, will only be in office for a term or 2 more. Okay? If we amend the Constitution, it will be around forever. And it fundamentally alters our government and the way that our government operates forever. Looking at the presidential election, okay? The reality is this, and I hate to break y'all's hearts, but Mississippi ain't deciding who the next Republican presidential nominee is. We're not. You can have your favorite, you can root for your favorite. We are not going to decide who the next nominee is. We got too few delegates, it falls too late in the process. We will know who our nominee is by the time it gets to the state of Mississippi. So by all means, be passionate about who you like. But understand that you're not going to impact who ultimately is the Republican nominee. You can impact this. You're not going to change whether or not Phil Bryant's going to be governor. He's going to be governor. You can impact this. Okay? So what is 42? Okay. 42, as I said, is a constitutional amendment. The other side will tell you what it does is to fully fund education. That's the goal. We're going to fully fund education. And we're going to do that without raising your taxes. It's not going to cost you anything. We're just going to spend more money. Figure that out. Okay? And then you actually look at the amendment, what it does. The current section of the Constitution that we're amending is Section 201. It is the section that deals with education policy in the state of Mississippi. Every law that the legislature has ever passed related to education, the hundreds of laws they've passed related to education, gets its authority out of Section 201 of the Constitution. Everything from the Mississippi Department of Education all the way down to your local elementary school gets its authority from Section 201. I'm going to tell you generally what it says. I'm going to paraphrase it. Okay? It says the legislature shall, by general law, provide for the establishment, maintenance, and support of free public schools upon such conditions and limitations as prescribed by the legislature. Okay? Now let me break that down what that means. That phrase, by general law, when it refers to the legislature, that is how the legislature gets its power to pass all of those laws that have ever been passed related to education. And when we talk about conditions and limitations, let me give you some practical examples. Includes how many days a year your kids go to school, how long a school day is, when those school days occurs, things like summer vacation. All of that factors in to conditions and limitations. The age your child starts school is one of those conditions and limitations. And how has the legislature used its power? Well, in part what they've done is they said, look, some of this stuff we can't do. So they've delegated a lot of that authority through that section of the Constitution to local schools, superintendents, school boards, and teachers. But it all starts with Section 201, and that's what we're amending. So if you think about that, understand that everything related to education comes out of 201. Now what they want to do is this. They want to say that their amendment is all about funding. But if you look at the amendment, there should be a copy of it on that little sheet that Mike passed out. If you look at the amendment says absolutely nothing about funding. The word funding doesn't appear in the amendment. People say, well, this is about the Mississippi Adequate Education Program, MAEP. Y'all might have seen the bumper stickers. Fund MAEP. Stop one of those people one day and say, tell me about this MAEP. What is it? Because the formula is so complicated that I guarantee you, whoever's got that on their car doesn't know what they're asking the legislature to fund. But the word MAEP, or Mississippi Adequate Education Program, is not in the amendment. So if you go around for a year passing out petitions at football games and PTA meetings in front of Walmarts, and you're telling people, if you sign this, we'll fully fund our schools without raising taxes, and then the amendment doesn't say anything about funding or anything about MAEP, is that deceptive? We've convinced people to support something that's not even in the amendment that's going to become a part of the Constitution. What does the amendment actually do? Well, I just told you that the existing 201 talks about education policy. It gives the legislature, your elected legislature, power over education policy. And it's all policy. It's not just spending. It talks about the establishment, maintenance, and support of free public schools. It's not limited to spending. Well, what the amendment does, it cuts out every reference to the legislature. The word legislature is no longer in Section 201 if this amendment passes. They've replaced it with the word state. The state shall provide an adequate and efficient education. And what the other side wants to say is, well, the word state encompasses the legislature. Here's my question for them. If their goal was not to diminish or eliminate the role of the legislature, why did they bother deleting the word legislature from the amendment? Why did they delete the part about passing general laws? That power's gone too. Or the conditions and limitations power is also gone. We have gutted the legislature if we pass this. Now I understand some people, I spoke in Tupelo and mentioned this to a group in Tupelo. There were 300 people in the audience and they were pretty much all pro-42. They had been conditioned to be pro-42. And when I mentioned this in Tupelo, an odd thing happened. They didn't disagree with me. The whole room erupted in applause at the idea of cutting out the legislature. And I stopped them and I said, I want to thank y'all for applauding that, because this is being recorded, and I want you to understand that what you've just applauded is the termination of representative government in the state of Mississippi. That you want to do away with your 174-member legislature and the power they have to enact education policy and to deal with education funding, which is close to 50% of our budget. Okay? So how do they get around this fact that they're doing away with the legislature? Well, they add a new power. They have added a power for chancery courts in the amendment. They have given the chancery courts in the state of Mississippi the power to determine what is, quote, adequate and efficient. I want to talk a little bit about this phrase for a second, because it's a phrase that has been focus grouped. Okay? If I asked every person in this room, independent of this amendment, do you want your schools to be adequate and efficient? Every person in this room, I suspect, would say yes. Those are nice words. But if I passed out a piece of paper to every person in this room and said, now, what I want you to do is to write down for me what it means for your school to be adequate and efficient. As many people that are in this room is how many different responses I would get, because it's an extremely subjective term. It is a broad, ambiguous term. It's precisely what the people who are pushing this want. They want to give power that is unlimited. Okay? And they're giving it to a chancery court. If it's a suit against the state, you've heard people dispute this idea about one judge. If it's a suit against the state, venue is proper in Hinds County. That's the way it's always been. So if the state gets sued under this new power, this new amendment, the lawsuit will get brought in Hinds County. And that means one of 4 chancellors in Hinds County, in Jackson, will get to decide education policy for the entire state of Mississippi. The entire state of Mississippi. So literally 1/4 of Jackson's voting population could be responsible for electing someone who has control over education policy and spending for the whole state. That's not representative government. That's not real accountability. That's dangerous. And I want to emphasize again, I know I've said this, but I want to emphasize it again, that this power is not limited to spending. There's nothing in the amendment that limits this power to spending. People have accused me of trying to promote fear tactics. I'm not. The truth is, what I'll tell you is this. This judge could do virtually anything. I'm not predicting that the judge will do crazy things. I'm telling you that what we're doing is we're empowering them and giving them the potential to do crazy things, and that the unintended consequences are only limited by the imagination of attorneys who are motivated by potential financial incentive to bring new theories and new types of claims into a courtroom. Okay? That could include asking judges to consolidate districts. That could include asking this judge, look, the people in Madison or Rankin County have great tax bases. Okay? So what we'd like to do is, instead of shipping income tax money from the state out to the school districts in Rankin and Madison or DeSoto or Lee or the coastal counties that all have good tax bases, those places are capable of sustaining themselves. Let them raise their property taxes, and then we'll take the money that should have gone to Rankin or should have gone to Madison or DeSoto or Lee or the coast, and we'll send that money to other districts. We'll essentially redistribute through the courts. I'm not saying that will happen. I'm saying we're giving the power to a judge to decide that it should happen, and that should scare you. That's not a fear tactic. That's a reality. Okay? And it may not happen in year 1. It may not happen in year 5. It may happen in year 20. The state of New Jersey is a prime example of this. New Jersey passed very similar, or had a very similar ruling, basically, 30 years ago. And because of that, they've had dozens of cases where people keep going back to the courts and asking for more. And every time they go back to the court, it moves it a little bit further and a little bit further. In the state of Washington, a few weeks back, you may have seen that they fined the legislature $100,000 a day for not coming up with enough money that a court had said needed to be put into education. Okay? And then about 2 weeks later, they came back and said, oh, by the way, charter schools are unconstitutional. We don't want parents to have that kind of choice. Under very similar kind of analysis and framework, we're opening Pandora's box if we pass this. It's the most dangerous thing that I think has ever been put on the ballot, and I say that for 2 reasons: because of the scope of the power that we're transferring, and because how effective the other side has been at convincing average people that this is for the kids. It's an emotional argument. They've convinced them that all it is about is putting a few more dollars in the classroom, and they're ignoring the fact that the amendment says nothing about funding, that it eliminates your legislature, and that it transfers all this power to a court. One of the lines you'll hear over and over again from the other side is this: if you don't break the law, you don't end up in front of a court. Okay? Let me tell you something as a lawyer. And I'm going to be rude to the camera for a minute. That's just dumb. Okay? And I generally don't like saying things about arguments like that. I like to, it's dumb. I practiced law for almost 10 years. My clients got sued an awful lot not having done anything wrong. You don't have to be right to sue somebody, and you don't have to be wrong to get sued. People get sued all the time. In fact, in the case of the legislature, with MAEP, Ronnie Musgrove recently sued the legislature, lost, because the court found that one legislature couldn't bind another legislature when it came to the constitutional power of appropriations. Okay? What this does is it opens the door to the next Ronnie Musgrove lawsuit. silly to say that you'd only end up in front of the court if you break the law. The other thing it does that people aren't contemplating is that it's not limited to a suit against the legislature. Teachers could get sued, schools could get sued, districts could get sued. We're opening the door to a lot of different kinds of lawsuits that a lot of people aren't thinking about. Okay. At the end of the day, I want to be able to answer any questions about things that you've heard and try and correct anything or address anything that you've heard. But at the end of the day, I want to stress this to you guys. This is the most important issue on the ballot in November. People who are in leadership roles are starting to understand that. We've seen the governor come out against it, the lieutenant governor's against it, the speaker's against it, Mr. Baker's against it. There are lots of people in the legislature that realize that this is really a bad deal for Mississippi. Okay? And then there are lots of people, even, former Governor Barber even came out against it. We've got the Republican Party unanimously passed a resolution against it. You've got all these business groups that understand this is bad for our economy because of the uncertainty it creates. The bankers and the realtors, the home builders, the manufacturers. The list is much longer than what I can remember. But they all recognize that this is ultimately bad for job growth and economic growth in the state of Mississippi. We're behind. The other side has been doing this for 2 years. They've raised an awful lot of money.
This is a bill about fully funding education.
They've got a great organization in place, a natural built organization in place of people who are very passionate and emotional about this issue. If you were going to measure the intensity of their side versus our side, they are far more intense right now. Our side seems to understand that it's bad, but they haven't bought into really doing anything about it. Okay? That's got to change, and it's got to change fast, or we will lose this fight. It can be won when people learn about the role of this judge. It automatically flips the script. People say, well, that's not right. That shouldn't happen. Most people intuitively understand that we shouldn't be given this power to a judge. But most people also don't understand that point until you or I tell them. We're going to have an air game. We're going to have radio, and we're going to have television. They're going to have more than we do because they've got more money than we do, candidly. Okay? But we're going to have that stuff. We're going to have a good digital ad campaign. We're going to have all the traditional bells and whistles of a campaign, and Mark can talk a little bit more about that. I will tell you that this is not a Russ's group is doing one thing and the Republicans are doing one thing and the business group are doing. It's all hands on deck and we're working together, which is what we've got to do if we want to beat this thing. But a good air game is nothing if we don't also have a good ground game. Okay? And groups like the Tea Party and Republican clubs and conservative coalitions are the natural ground game in this kind of fight because you guys appreciate the Constitution. You appreciate concepts like separation of power. You understand that centralization of power is a bad thing. Okay? We are going to be phone banking from now until the end of this thing. We've already started. We've got a script prepared. We've got a data system ready for you guys. It's good technology. We've got people who can train you how to use the technology. But the truth is that unless people show up at phone banks and make the calls, it doesn't matter that we have all the technology. It doesn't matter that we've written good scripts. Okay? Same thing with walking doors. We've got a plan to walk doors in 13 counties. That plan only happens if people show up on Saturdays and say, I want to walk this door. I want to be the one that convinces this person who's never heard of 42 or who has heard the wrong thing about 42 that this is bad for Mississippi. I came here tonight not just to preach at y'all. I am preaching, I know that, and tell y'all how bad this is, but to ask for your help. That on Tuesday and Thursday nights at my office, we're going to meet and we're going to make phone calls until people get tired of making phone calls. And on Saturdays, we're going to walk until people get tired of walking. And if you can't walk, then you can make phone calls. It's easy to do. It's remarkable. I've done a lot of phone banking in my life. It's remarkable how receptive people have been so far to listening to what 42 is about, because there are a lot of people that just don't know and are interested. We've got the ability to make an impact. I've got a 75,000 call plan. Okay? We can hit that number. We can. But it's going to take 20 or 30 people who are willing to rotate through. I'm not saying every dime, willing to rotate through and make phone calls. So before I leave today, I'm going to stand in the back of the room and I'm going to ask every person in the room to give me their name, phone number, and email address. And you're going to get a call from me, maybe multiple calls from me, or somebody that works for me, and they're going to say, hey, we really need you here on Tuesday night. The commitment that I want you to make in your own mind and heart tonight is that it's worth the fight for the next generation. Say, when you get that phone call, you're going to say, yes, I'm going to be there, whether it's on a Tuesday, a Thursday, or walking doors on a Saturday, so that we can beat this thing back and protect our children.